There's a question I kept seeing online in skincare forums, dermatology discussions, and comment sections. Why is nobody talking about DNA repair enzymes? And at first, I had no idea what they were, so I looked into it. And once I started reading the research on DNA repair in skin, the whole topic began to feel surprisingly relevant and oddly invisible. So I myself began to ask, why is nobody talking about DNA repair enzymes? It intrigued me enough that I decided to test the technology myself for 3 months using 2 products from Photozyme MD. Hey, I'm Stephanie, and in this Inside Out, Upside Down review, we're going to go beyond the usual question of, is this good, and take a closer look at the science behind DNA repair enzyme skincare to see whether it's a genuine innovation or just very clever marketing. We'll start with the products that I tested from Photozyme MD, then we will zoom out to the biology behind the enzymes, and finally, we will come back to the real question: what actually happened after 90 days of use? Along the way, we'll look at what DNA repair enzymes actually are, how they're supposed to work in skincare, whether the science behind them actually holds up, and what my unfiltered before and after photos in natural light showed after 3 months of testing these. And if you're just here looking for something specific, I always include timestamps so you can easily jump to whatever section is most useful to you. First, disclosure. I purchased the products that I tested myself. This video is not sponsored. However, I do use affiliate links and my discount code StumbleInStyle, which means I may receive a small commission if you choose to shop through those links. Using them helps support independent testing like this. One more thing before we dive in, I'm a musician by profession, not a dermatologist or cosmetic chemist, and I am not offering any medical advice. Everything I'm sharing today is based on my layperson interpretation of scientific papers I found on the interwebs and my personal experience testing these products. If you have specific cosmetic or medical concerns about your skin, please talk to a qualified professional. Now, let's get into the experiment. For this test, I made one change to my skincare routine. I added DNA repair enzymes through 2 Photozyme MD products. I applied the DNA Youth Recovery Facial Serum on my face daily and the omega-36 DNA body complex on the rest of my body a few times a week. And I did this consistently for 90 days. I chose that time frame intentionally. This is part of my Great Skinvestigation, which is my long-term testing format where I evaluate potentially powerful skincare ingredients and formulations over the course of several months to see whether they actually do anything noticeable for my skin. Because if I'm going to spend my time and money on skincare, I want to make sure it's actually doing something. And if you want more details about how I structure my testing process, you can check out the video that I made about that here. Skin renews itself in cycles, and visible changes in skin structure can often take several cycles to appear. So I chose to test these products for 90 days. At my age, in my mid-40s, that should capture at least one full skin cycle, which gives us a fair chance of seeing whether any real changes begin to appear. Later, we will take a close look at the before and after photos and discuss what I noticed or didn't notice. But interestingly enough, this was one of those experiments where I wasn't necessarily expecting dramatic, visible, or tangible results, because DNA repair enzymes fall into a category of skincare that I like to call crew skincare. As a musician, I tend to organize skincare products into 3 categories: rockstar skincare, backing band skincare, and crew skincare. Rockstar skincare contains ingredients that are famous for visibly changing the skin. They're the stars of the show, like retinol, vitamin C, or some strong exfoliating acids. Backing band skincare might not make headlines, but it definitely supports the whole show. It includes things like hydrators and nourishing oils. Their effect can visibly and tangibly support the rockstar ingredients. And then there's crew skincare. These products do invisible work behind the scenes. They are essential, but they don't always get credit because their job is often preventative. Sunscreen is the perfect example. Dermatologists consistently tell us that sunscreen is one of the most powerful anti-aging tools that we have. Yet sunscreen never really makes the headlines because it doesn't visibly transform your skin. Instead, it prevents damage that would otherwise accumulate. It works behind the scenes. DNA repair enzymes belong in that same damage mitigation category, but I tested them like I would test rockstar skincare because I was wondering if they might have the potential to do more, maybe even to steal the show. To understand why I thought that and what these enzymes are even supposed to be doing, it helps to zoom out and look at the bigger picture of what's happening inside our cells every day, because DNA damage isn't actually a rare event and you don't even necessarily need the sun for it to happen. It's happening constantly. In fact, the importance of DNA repair is so fundamental to biology that 3 scientists won a Nobel Prize in 2015 just for figuring out how some of our DNA repair systems work. And the Nobel Prize website explains it in a way that I found really helpful. Plus, this information is not from a skincare brand, so there isn't any self-interest involved in this definition. They write that every day our DNA is damaged by things like UV radiation, free radicals, and other environmental stressors. But even without those external factors, DNA is surprisingly fragile on its own. In fact, one of the winners, Thomas Lindahl, demonstrated that DNA decays at a rate that ought to have made development of life on Earth impossible. Thousands of small changes in our genetic material happen inside our cells every single day. And every single time a cell divides and copies its DNA, which happens millions of times a day in the human body, additional errors can occur. So the reason our genetic material doesn't descend into complete chemical chaos is that our cells are equipped with an entire network of molecular repair systems, including DNA repair enzymes. These systems constantly monitor our DNA and repair damage as it happens. So dermatologists and researchers started asking an intriguing question. If our skin already has DNA repair systems, could topical products help support or even enhance those repair processes? That question began in the biomedical field as a potential cancer treatment and eventually led to the development of DNA repair enzyme skincare. But before we can understand what those enzymes might do in a skincare product, I think we need to understand what kinds of damage they're trying to repair in the first place. And in skin, 2 major forces are constantly creating DNA damage. The first is ultraviolet radiation from sunlight, and the second is oxidative damage from free radicals produced by our environment and even just our body's own normal cell functions. Let's start by taking a closer look at UV damage. Anyone who has ever gone to the beach and gotten a sunburn is familiar with the unpleasant effect of UV damage. But what's going on underneath that redness and discomfort? Well, the UV is damaging the DNA, and what is the DNA? It's basically a set of instructions written in a 4-letter code, and UV can kind of get in there and make the letters sticky, and so the letters might start sticking together, or maybe the structure of the DNA strand might change, or it might create other kinds of damage that make it hard for the cell to read that damaged code. And over time, this can contribute to mutations, pigmentation changes, which show up as sunspots, collagen breakdown, which means a loss of firmness, and abnormal cell growth, which in some cases can lead to cancer. And this is one of the reasons that dermatologists emphasize sun protection so strongly. The second major force is oxidative damage. Smoking, alcohol, urban air quality, general pollution, and even the normal tiny chemical jobs that our cells do to keep us alive can produce unstable molecules called free radicals. And free radicals behave like little tiny pickpockets. They wander around, stealing electrons from nearby molecules. And when they steal from important structures in the skin, like DNA, they can create damage. Over time, that damage contributes to wrinkles, uneven pigmentation, loss of firmness, basically the signs of aging, and it can also lead to mutations and ultimately cancer. But as we found out from those 2015 Nobel Prize winners, our bodies have systems designed to repair this damage. One of the most common questions I actually received from you was whether DNA repair enzymes actually repair DNA, or if it's just a very clever marketing name, and I love that skepticism. It turns out it's not just marketing jargon. This type of enzyme already exists in our bodies, and they are constantly actually repairing our DNA. But 2 things complicate that process. First, damage is happening constantly, so there's always a lot to keep up with, and the longer we live, the longer the to-do list gets. Second, our repair capacity gradually declines with age. We produce fewer enzymes, which isn't ideal. Having fewer resources to deal with more damage is never a recipe for success. These complications led scientists to wonder if it might be possible to add DNA repair enzymes to skincare. Because what if topical products could help skin repair damage more efficiently, especially as we get older? Researchers began exploring this idea decades ago, and the results have been promising enough to keep the field moving forward ever since, which is part of why it surprises me that this category still gets so little attention. But interestingly, researchers found that some of the most useful enzymes come from organisms that have specialized repair mechanisms that humans don't naturally possess. So scientists began experimenting with adding those enzymes to topical creams, which sounds a little bit like Frankenstein's skincare, but the idea is simply that if these enzymes reach the right layers of the skin, they may help target different kinds of DNA damage in different ways, working alongside our own natural repair systems to give them a little bit of extra oomph. So let's take a look at these enzymes and see how realistic that looks when we dive deeper. The Photozyme products that I tested contain 3 different DNA repair enzymes that work in different ways. And quick disclaimer, I have read these names in research papers far more often than I've ever said them aloud, so we're going to go on a bit of a pronunciation adventure together today. The first enzyme has an origin story that I did not see coming. It's called photolyase, and it's often listed in skincare ingredients list as plankton extract. In very simplified terms, when UV radiation fuses 2 neighboring DNA bases together, photolyase can split them apart again. You can think of it as a tiny molecular scalpel that separates those fused bases, so the cell can read the DNA normally again. This enzyme specifically targets one of the most common forms of UV-induced DNA damage and directly reverses it. Humans don't naturally produce photolyase, so adding it topically may introduce a repair mechanism that our skin doesn't normally have. And I had to laugh because this enzyme comes from plankton, which my brain automatically connects with the SpongeBob character. So every time I put this on, it's like putting plankton guts all over my face. The second enzyme is called endonuclease, and it works differently. It's often listed as micrococcus lysate in the ingredients, and it's derived from a marine microbe. And instead of reversing the damage directly, it identifies damaged DNA and acts like a pair of molecular scissors, making a small cut in the DNA strand near the lesion. That cut signals the cell's natural repair machinery to then remove and rebuild the damaged section. Humans already produce endonuclease enzymes as part of our natural DNA repair system. So the idea of adding them topically is that additional enzymes may help the skin repair damage more efficiently, especially when the repair workload becomes very high. The third enzyme targets a different type of damage, the oxidative DNA damage, which is the kind that's caused by normal chemical reactions happening inside our cells over time. This is the OG enzyme because it's called OGG1 glycosylase, and in skincare ingredient decks, it often appears as Arabidopsis thaliana extract, which is the plant source that the enzyme is derived from. Its job is to recognize individual DNA bases that have been damaged by free radicals and then remove them so that the cell can replace them with the correct ones. So in very simplified terms, it acts like a tiny little eraser that removes the wrong base so that the DNA can be rewritten correctly. Humans naturally produce OGG1 as part of their normal DNA repair machinery. I say there as if I'm an alien. But the theory behind adding this one is that supplementing that system may help address oxidative damage that accumulates as we age or experience environmental stress. So in simple terms, these 3 enzymes are tackling different types of damage in different ways. What I think is interesting is how these enzymes have been studied, that it was done in a biomedical context and was then later adapted for cosmetic purposes. In my experience, that has often yielded the most effective skincare. If you want to see an example of what I'm talking about, then you can check out my growth factor review of Calisym skincare here. In that case, research began on burn patients and diabetics with skin lesions, but their skin looked so good after treatment with growth factors that the research was then applied to cosmetics. What I think makes the research feel particularly credible in this case here is that scientists often study these enzymes in patients with xeroderma pigmentosum. That's a rare genetic condition that disables one of the skin's natural DNA repair systems. And because the patient's own repair pathways are impaired, it becomes a lot easier for researchers to detect whether an external repair enzyme is actually doing what they want it to. And some studies using topical DNA repair enzymes have even shown reductions in precancerous skin lesions known as actinic keratosis, which leads me to ask the following question. If topical DNA repair enzymes have reduced precancerous lesions, couldn't they also potentially reduce less dramatic DNA damage like sunspots or texture? But before anyone, including me, gets too excited, it is important to keep perspective. DNA repair enzymes are mainly considered a backup layer of protection. Primary protection is always shade, protective clothing, sunscreen, and a healthy lifestyle. DNA repair enzymes act more like a backup repair crew. They help address damage that occurs if UV radiation gets through those primary barriers, and they also help with that stubborn internal oxidative damage from free radicals too. But if they're repairing that damage, how far can they go? Will it be far enough for me to see a difference when I use it? If I have sunspots or fine lines or texture, will DNA repair enzymes repair those things too? Well, first we have to deal with a very important issue, because another smart question I received from you is, can these enzymes even get through the skin barrier in the first place? And are they stable enough to be effective? Because even if these enzymes work in theory, skin is, by its nature, a barrier. Large molecules, especially proteins like enzymes, usually struggle to get through the outermost layers of skin. And this is why many of the strongest formulations in this DNA repair enzyme skincare category use liposomes. Liposomes are tiny fat bubbles made from the same kinds of molecules that form our own cell membranes, so they can help carry ingredients through the outermost layers of the skin and improve their ability to get into the epidermis. At the same time, these liposomes also help protect fragile enzymes from breaking down too quickly, which increases the chances that the enzymes remain active long enough to do their job. And this delivery mechanism is actually one of the reasons that I chose Photozyme MD as the brand that I would test. Several companies out there use DNA repair enzyme technology, but not all brands are created equal. Out of the brands that looked like they might be most effective, I chose Photozyme MD for a few reasons. First, the combination of all three complementary enzymes. Not all brands use all three of them, and I just thought that would be most effective. Second, they use a liposomal delivery system, meaning the enzymes can potentially get where they need to go. Third, the formulas have complementary ingredients. For example, the DNA Youth Recovery Facial Serum has the DNA repair enzymes, but it also includes ingredients like hyaluronic acid to hydrate the skin and an antioxidant called ergothioneine to provide added protection from free radicals. The fourth reason I chose Photozyme MD is that they do not use fragrance in their products. It's kind of hard to find. Fifth was that they looked like they would fit well into my routine because the formulas are lightweight. And sixth, they were less expensive than some of the other options. For example, at the time of filming, the DNA Youth Recovery Facial Serum with 1.7 ounces retails for $120, which is a little over half the price of some of the other brands that I was looking at. And the omega-36 DNA Body Complex with 8 ounces also retails for $120. But if you ever decide to explore Photozyme products, I would strongly recommend waiting for a sale rather than paying full price because they run promotions a lot. My discount code usually gives you about 25% off, but they frequently adjust it upwards. And during some of their larger sales like Black Friday, my code has gone as high as 40% off. And if I notice a particularly good sale, I'll usually update it in the pinned comment under relevant videos like this one. And I often share the deals that I find most useful for myself, the ones that I take advantage of. I put those on my community tab as well. And that way, if anyone is interested in trying it, at least you don't have to pay full retail price, and you can do it at a time that best suits your schedule and your budget. I have oily combination skin, and I knew that I would be layering this product under things like sunscreen and makeup and other products, so I wanted a lightweight serum. Some of the other products on the market, including other alternatives from Photozyme MD, also look like they're formulated well, but they have heavier, more nourishing ingredients. And I was essentially looking for the most effective formulation in the lightest weight delivery system, so that's why I ended up choosing the DNA Youth Recovery Serum. Other companies using DNA repair enzymes include NEOVA, ISDIN, Platinum Skincare, REGELICA, and even some of the most expensive luxury brands look like they might be sneakily incorporating these enzymes into their ingredient decks. But the formulations differ significantly, and we'll dive deeper into that comparison in the next video, because today I wanted to focus on the brand that I chose to try, and that is Photozyme MD. Let's start with the basic user experience, because if a product isn't isn't pleasant to use, then consistency becomes difficult. And if I'm not going to use it consistently, it doesn't matter how well it works, I won't see results. I applied the DNA Youth Recovery Facial Serum almost every day for 3 months. I only missed about 4 days during that entire period. Depending on the climate that I was in, the serum was actually moisturizing enough on its own. In more temperate conditions, I could skip a separate moisturizer entirely. But when I was in very cold, dry climates, I did need to add a richer moisturizer on top of this to keep my skin comfortable. I don't have the most sensitive skin in the world, but I do have rosacea and a touch of eczema, so I kept a close eye out for any irritation. Luckily, this serum felt more soothing than anything else, and it did not trigger my rosacea, my eczema, or cause any breakouts. That being said, everyone has different sensitivities, and skincare is very personal, so your results may vary. And if you have any sensitivities, be sure to check the ingredients deck. The serum itself is extremely cosmetically elegant. There's no noticeable scent, even though sandalwood extract does appear on the ingredients list, and I found that it layered beautifully under my sunscreen, makeup, and other skincare. I didn't experience any pilling or strange reactions. It absorbs quickly and essentially disappeared into my skin, which makes it very easy to use daily. The omega-36 DNA body complex surprised me a little bit. Body care is one of those routines I never seem to be able to maintain, mostly because the majority of the body creams that I've tried feel heavy and sticky and inconvenient just because they take forever to dry down. But this one has a gel texture that absorbs pretty quickly. I ended up applying it about 2 to 3 times per week whenever I had time after a shower. And it provides just enough moisture to take the edge off of my dryness without leaving that sticky feeling that makes me hesitate to get dressed afterwards. My skin gets uncomfortably dry when I'm in cold climates, and this was enough for me in those situations. But if you have extremely dry skin, I think you would probably need to top it off with a richer, more nourishing product. But for me, this was perfect. It was lightweight, comfortable, and easy to use regularly. And again, ease of use tends to determine whether something becomes part of my routine or slowly moves back to the bathroom shelf to collect dust. This was the first body moisturizer I have ever managed to stick with using for more than just a couple of weeks. In fact, this is the only one I have ever completely used up and then had to repurchase. The most immediate change I noticed when using these had nothing to do with pigmentation or sunspots. It was softness. My skin became noticeably softer, both on my face and on my body. In fact, anyone who happened to touch my skin during that first few weeks commented on how soft it felt. And even I was surprised because I never thought of my skin as particularly rough, but after about a month of using these products, the difference was obvious enough that my previous skin texture suddenly felt almost like sandpaper by comparison. And that was an unexpected bonus. It's difficult to say whether that softness came primarily from the enzymes themselves or from the supporting ingredients in these formulas, since there are several other great skincare ingredients in here as well. But regardless of the mechanism, the tactile improvement was noticeable quite early. By about the 2-month mark, my skin felt consistently soothed, smooth, and generally very happy. And based on that experience alone, I decided to repurchase the serum and the body complex while they were on sale so that I could continue using them long term. Because even if the only benefit had been improved skin comfort and softness, that would have already been enough for me to keep it in my routine. But of course, I was still extremely curious about something else. Now we get to the part that I personally was most curious about, because the preventative aspect of the skincare isn't really something that you can test. Because how can you test whether you have prevented damage from happening? You can't. But before and after photos, they have the potential to be exciting. Plus, several of you had asked whether something that's mostly preventative, like this, could actually produce visible results. And I wanted to know just as much as you did. So this is where we find out whether DNA repair enzymes really behave like purely preventative crew skincare, or whether they might secretly have a bit of rock star energy hiding in the background. So, after 90 days of rubbing plankton guts all over my face, The after photo shows skin that looks brighter, smoother, and generally healthier. But let's take a closer look to see what might be going on. These photos were taken in natural light. They are unfiltered and unedited. I do think that the Youth Recovery Serum made some changes to my face. The changes are subtle, but there are enough of them that I feel confident that something meaningful may be happening. The first thing I noticed was that the redness in the before photo is more widespread. In the after photo, the redness appears calmer and more localized. I do have rosacea, so I was pleasantly surprised to see that my skin seemed a little bit calmer and smoother across my cheeks, chin, and forehead. That wasn't something I was expecting from this experiment, but it is something I am very happy about. And it turns out that there's actually science behind it. When a cell is damaged, its immune response is lowered, and a lowered immune response can contribute to a buildup of things like bacteria and yeast, which can trigger inflammation and redness. So I'm wondering if my reduced redness might be a sign that cell damage really is being repaired. Another change that I noticed when comparing these photos is the overall surface texture of the skin. In the before photo, the light hitting my forehead and upper cheeks reflects a little more unevenly. There are tiny variations in texture that catch the light and create small highlights and shadows. In the after photo, the reflection of light across those same areas looks a little bit smoother and more even. That gives the skin a slightly more polished appearance overall. That doesn't mean that my pores disappeared or that the skin suddenly became glass smooth, but the surface does look more refined, particularly across the forehead and the upper cheeks. Now, this could come from several factors: improved hydration, reduced inflammation, or healthier skin turnover. So I can't say with certainty that the enzymes themselves are responsible or if the other ingredients in the formula helped with this, but the change is visible enough in the photos that I do think it's worth mentioning. Now, let's look at the pigmentation. My freckles are still there, but I was born with those, so I didn't expect them to disappear. My larger sunspots are still there, so this is definitely not a miracle transformation. But when we zoom in, something interesting starts to appear. Several of the smaller and lighter spots appear softer or slightly faded compared with the earlier photo. None of these changes are dramatic, but the pattern of fading and softening is consistent enough across several spots that it is hard to dismiss, which is exactly the kind of gradual change I would expect if damaged cells are slowly being replaced by healthier ones over time. When I compare the arm photos side by side, the changes follow the same pattern as my face. The surface looks more even, especially in the center of the forearm, and little bumpy bits on my skin look smoother. The larger pigment spots are still there, so this is clearly not acting like a strong pigment treatment, but many of my smaller spots faded noticeably, if not completely. And once again, the surface of my skin is reflecting more light more evenly, which gives the skin a smoother and brighter appearance overall. And that actually matches what I felt with my hands during the experiment. My skin became noticeably softer, and that reduced texture seems to show up visually in how the light spreads across the surface. When several small changes all point in the same direction, it becomes harder to dismiss them as coincidence. One thing that makes me particularly curious is something I noticed while reading the research. In one study involving actinic keratosis, those are the precancerous sun-damaged lesions, real improvement showed up after 48 weeks of treatment. That's 4 times as long as I've been using it. So it raises an interesting question. If I'm already seeing small improvements to my pigmentation after 3 months, what might happen after 12? I decided to make DNA repair enzymes a permanent part of my base skincare routine for reasons that we'll discuss in a bit, which means we'll actually be able to revisit this question at the end of the year, so subscribe if you'd like to see the follow-up. While that experiment continues running in the background, my next project is a split face test. On one half of my face, I am using my current favorite luxury growth factor regimen from Calisim, which I already tested and reviewed, and on the other half, I am testing a more affordable brand that makes very similar claims. And because I apparently enjoy turning myself into a walking science project, I am also testing expensive peptides on one side of my neck and chest and a more affordable option on the other. But once again, we will have to wait 90 days before we can see if there are any noticeable results. So after 3 months of testing, I am optimistic about Photozyme MD and DNA repair enzymes in general. The changes feel real enough that I felt comfortable repurchasing these products products with my own money and making DNA repair enzymes part of my long-term base routine. And perhaps more importantly for me, this feels like the kind of skincare that supports the long-term health of the skin rather than just creating a cosmetic effect. I still want to keep my expectations grounded though. I do not think that this is miracle skincare, and I don't think that anyone needs to run out and buy it right now. But I do think it seems like a genuinely useful skin health product, especially for people who have spent a lot of time in the sun or in polluted areas like cities. Before we move on, I just want to quickly address a few practical questions that came up in the comments while I was preparing for this video. You asked where DNA repair enzymes fit into a skincare routine, what time of day they should be applied, and what they can be combined with. The good news is that they're pretty flexible and actually very easy to use, even for those of us with sensitive skin. Both the DNA Youth Recovery Facial Serum and the Omega-36 DNA Body Complex are very lightweight products. So whether you just use the body complex all over, including on your face, or if you're using both products the way I did, they can generally be the very first thing you apply after cleansing and before moisturizer and sunscreen, just like most treatment serums. Most dermatology brands recommend using DNA repair enzyme products in your morning routine because they help address DNA damage caused by UV exposure, but there's also another huge reason, because one of the interesting facts about the photolyase enzyme is that it is activated by light. So you will get the most bang for your buck by applying it in the morning, but they can also be used at night. And during the summer, I personally plan to apply them both in the morning and at night so that I can benefit from the protection during the day when I'm in the sun, and the products can also help me recover overnight when my skin is rejuvenating anyway. These formulas also tend to play well with other skincare ingredients. They can usually easily be combined with things like vitamin C, niacinamide, azelaic acid, hyaluronic acid, and retinoids. But I have a hypothesis that one interesting tool to combine with DNA repair enzymes is red light therapy. Earlier, I mentioned that the photolyase enzyme is activated by light, but it's specifically activated by visible blue light, not red light. So the red light itself doesn't switch that enzyme on. But here's why I think red light still might be interesting to pair with DNA repair enzymes. And editing Stephanie is going to take care of this explanation because recording Stephanie didn't state everything so clearly. Basically, I think that red light therapy pairs well with DNA enzymes because your cells are kind of like a work crew, and some of the employees on that work crew are the DNA repair enzymes. And the cell is in charge of regulating all of that. And the more energy the cell has to do that, the more efficiently that work can take place. Red light kind of boosts the mitochondria of your cells, and that's the energy center. So if your cells have more energy to carry out these changes, then the DNA repair enzymes can work more efficiently. So I think the two approaches work on different parts of the same problem. The enzymes target the specific damage, and the red light helps create the conditions where repair can happen more efficiently. So I think they're good teammates, each doing work that helps the other. I mean, if you happen to have a red light mask that also includes a blue light feature, then you could theoretically, I guess, use that blue light to activate the photolyase enzyme if you apply it in the evening. But in practice, applying the serum during the day already exposes it to visible blue light naturally. If you'd like a deeper dive in how red light therapy actually works in skin, I did a whole video breaking down the research on that, so I'll link it below. And if you're curious about red light devices, I'll link a few options below that look really well designed. One thing that does matter with DNA repair enzymes is consistency, because they are addressing ongoing cellular damage, and they tend to work best used regularly over longer periods of time. Some skincare actives are more like tools that you can reach for when you need them. Exfoliants, for example, you use them, they do their thing, and if you skip a week here or there, it's not a big deal. But other ingredients only really work if you apply them consistently, either because the results build gradually over time, like with retinol, or because protection only lasts as long as the ingredient is actually present, like sunscreen. DNA repair enzymes fall firmly into that second group. The damage is ongoing, so the repair work is ongoing, and the benefits are cumulative, so this is very much a long game sort of product. And of course, every good review attempts to answer one important question: who is this for? And conversely, who is it not for? DNA repair enzymes are interesting because they potentially serve two audiences at once: people interested in cosmetic improvements and people interested in long-term skin health. Because every single one of us experiences DNA damage in our skin. Sunlight, pollution, and even the normal chemical processes happening in our bodies all contribute to that damage. So, in theory, pretty much anyone could benefit from additional repair support. But if we have to prioritize what we buy, and most of us do, let's first talk about who can skip this. If you know that you are just not the type of person who will apply skincare regularly, I would avoid buying it in the first place. Skincare, especially with active ingredients, does expire. So if it's just going to sit on your shelf and collect dust, I would save the money and the effort dusting. Or if you are a teen or tween, you haven't accumulated much damage yet, and chances are your body is still fully stocked with its own DNA repair enzymes. And because at that age, most of us just don't have that kind of money to spend on skincare, I think focusing on things like sunscreen is the more realistic option. That said, if you are younger and you have the budget, science actually suggests that earlier is better with preventative care, just like with sunscreen. The less damage that builds up over time, the less there is to repair later. So although it is not necessary, I also don't think it's ever too early to be aware that this category exists. And the reason I say that is because I wish I had known about this earlier. But all in all, I think the people who might benefit the most from DNA repair enzymes are those of us with significant sun or environmental exposure. If your lifestyle involves a lot of time outdoors, if you smoke, or if you live in an urban area with traffic pollution, secondhand smoke, or other environmental stressors, or if you're simply older, then your skin has likely accumulated a fair amount of damage over the years. That part definitely applies to me. I grew up on the coast, spending huge amounts of time outdoors, on the water, in the water, near the water, and I still spend as much time outside as I possibly can. Plus, I live in a city, which means if I had known about this technology earlier, I probably would have been using it just as consistently as I use sunscreen. And that's one of the reasons that this topic grabbed me so strongly when I just stumbled across it last year. It feels like one of those simple tools that could have easily been supporting my skin health through decades of sun and city life. I just wish I had known about it earlier. Now, if you are curious about trying Photozyme MD specifically, I personally think that the omega-36 DNA body complex is the easiest place to start because the 8-ounce bottle gives you the best price per ounce, and you can use it on both the body and the face. During my test, I applied it to my entire body except for my face about 2 to 3 times per week, and one bottle lasted me roughly 2 months. The DNA Youth Recovery Serum is a little bit more moisturizing and contains some additional supportive ingredients, so I personally prefer using this one on my face, which tends to need a little bit more tender loving care in general. But I do think that both products have their merits, so when I decided to repurchase, I ended up buying both. The facial serum is a little bit harder for me to estimate in terms of how long the bottle will last because I changed the amount that I was using throughout the experiment. During the first month, I used 1 pump in the morning because I wanted to make sure I had enough for the whole test. By the second month, I was using 2 pumps every morning, and in the third month, I even started adding some applications in the evening as well. And my first bottle lasted about 3 months under those changing conditions. My rough estimate is that if someone were to use 2 pumps in the morning and 1 pump at night consistently, a 1.7-ounce bottle would probably last closer to 2 months. After 3 months, DNA repair enzymes have earned a permanent place in my base routine because the changes were real, the science seems promising, and this feels like the kind of skincare that's actually doing something useful underneath the surface, whether or not you can see it in a photo. If you spent a lot of time in the sun, in cities, or you're just someone who thinks about the long game, I do think that this category is worth knowing about, which is why I still can't quite shake the question of why nobody talks about this. The science has been around for decades. Dermatologists have been studying it seriously, and yet most people who care about their skin deeply have never even heard of it. I know I hadn't, and I have some thoughts on why that might be, and I think the answer actually says something really interesting about how the beauty industry works. If you want me to dig into that, let me know in the comments with a megaphone emoji. Next time, we're diving deeper on different formulations, because once you start reading the ingredient deck side by side, I think it makes it easier to figure out which product is the best match for your skin. I chose these products from Photozyme because they looked like they best fit my needs, and I think they did, but your needs might point you somewhere different. In the meantime, have you heard of DNA repair enzymes before this? Have you tried them? I would love to know what your experience has been, good or bad, so let me know in the comments. Because as always, the goal of this channel is for all of us to keep stumbling across better ideas, better products, and more intentional ways of enjoying beauty. If you found this useful, you might also like this video here. Thanks for hanging out, and to all of my patrons and channel members, including my Adagio angels, for making this long-term testing format possible. I hope we can all remember that even stumbling is a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.